Yesterday, I asked if it would be okay if I talked a little bit about domestic violence on stage. And she was like, yeah, totally. It's your experience too. You know, go for it. And I was like, cool. I'm gonna say something like, thank you to my mom for surviving unimaginable abuse and violence. And she was like, but it is imaginable. Too many people can imagine it. So thank you, Mom, for showing me how to survive.
You are one of 3 LGBTQ artists nominated for Best New Artist. Obviously, I'm hoping for a day where that's not such a headline, but I am curious, knowing that you're one of 3 in this huge category, what does that mean to you?
It means a lot. When I was a kid, I clung to any representation at all. I think we all love movies that seem like queer movies that aren't, like Bend It Like Beckham and stuff. Like, it's not a gay movie, but I was like, it's a gay movie in my heart. So I think that not reaching so far for it and there being more representation is so meaningful, and it would have really helped me as a kid, so it's cool.
Absolutely. And think about you helping so many kids now. I mean, does that feel like a weighted responsibility?
No, I mean, it does feel like a responsibility, but I feel like all I can really do is tell the truth.
Phoebe's statement against Marilyn Manson. Let's take a look at what Phoebe Bridgers tweeted about Marilyn Manson on February the 4th, 2021. I went to Marilyn Manson's house when I was a teenager with some friends. I was a big fan. He referred to a room in his house as the R room. I thought it was just his horrible frat boy sense of humour. I stopped being a fan. I stand with everyone who came forward. Let's start with a statement that she made to Variety in an interview. We have a look through. She talks about a lot of things here. In addition to Crosby and Adams, Bridges' social media targets include Marilyn Manson, who is facing a battery of misconduct allegations that Bridges says were in line with his behaviour during a visit she made to his home when she was a teenager. I had a friend whose parents worked on a TV show that he wanted to be a part of, and they knew I was a fan and brought me along to the meeting, she recalls. I heard him say slurs and jokes, and he was on his best behaviour. I am not one of his victims, but the fact that I can corroborate the stuff he's been accused of in some way is really expository to me. She didn't hesitate to share the experience when the accusations arose last month. It reveals something that we can work with. So let's begin by asking who the friend and whose parents worked on a TV show that Manson wanted to be a part of. Once this question is answered, many other questions are brought to light. Fortunately, we can easily deduce who this friend is. Okay, on June the 14th, 2014, a band named Buster put out a full 7-song EP before embarking on her successful solo career. One of the bands Phoebe Bridgers played in was Buster, and on the EP from 2014, she's credited with guitar and vocals. Also credited with guitar and vocals in the band is Jackson White. Phoebe and her Buster bandmate Jackson White had also lent their guitars and voices to a song by Tara Naomi in 2013, before the Buster EP came out. Jackson White is the son of drummer Jack White and actress Katie Seagal. After Jack and Katie divorced, Katie Seagal married Kurt Sutter. Jackson White is therefore Kurt Sutter's stepson. Kurt Sutter is the creator of the acclaimed television show Sons of Anarchy, which his wife Katie Seagal was featured in.
Sons of Anarchy recruits an interesting new cast member for its final season send-off. FX issued a press release announcing that Marilyn Manson has been cast for a recurring role in Sons' 7th and final season. Manson will play Ron Tully, a white supremacist prison shot caller who Jax uses to expand his power base. According to the report, Manson actually reached out to SOA boss Kurt Sutter and asked to be a part of the show. Quote, Sons of Anarchy has been such a big part of my life, as well as my father's, Manson explains, so I was determined to make him proud by being involved in what will probably be remembered as the most amazing piece of television cinema.
As we know, because Marilyn Manson and his father bonded over their mutual love for Sons of Anarchy, Manson wanted to get a role on the show, which he successfully achieved. He appeared in the last season of the show, which debuted on September 9, 2014. His role was that of a shot caller of the Aryan Brotherhood, incarcerated in Stockton State Prison. If we go to Phoebe's and Kurt's Twitter accounts, it should be noted Phoebe still follows both Kurt Sutter and Katie Seagal on Twitter. Unfortunately, Jackson doesn't have much of a social media presence, and we see what they were posting around this time. We come across some very revealing things. This is what we find. An Instagram post of Marilyn Manson's cat in Marilyn Manson's sink last night. On December 19th, 2013, Phoebe wrote this. This was apparently posted on Instagram, was accompanied by a photo. However, this post has since been deleted on Instagram, though I was able to track down the photo from this Instagram post on Phoebe's Tumblr account, where she forgot to delete it. Dear oh dear. The day prior to this, therefore, on December 18th, 2013, is the day when Phoebe Bridgers went to Manson's house. On that day, it appears Jackson White may have taken a selfie while buying a Christmas tree, according to Phoebe's Tumblr account, which was also deleted from Instagram. Another post that Phoebe deleted but still can be found on her Tumblr account captures her naked in bed with boyfriend Leonardo Lawrence a day earlier on December 17th. Interestingly, on December 20th, 2013, Kurt Sutter tweeted the following: If I told you that I was kicking around some musical musings with Marilyn Manson and Shooter Jennings, would you be terrified? Here we seem to have the nature of what the meeting Phoebe described was about. Apparently, it was about Manson and Shooter Jennings providing some sort of music for the show. In May 2014, Cutter responded to a question on Instagram about how Manson got involved with the show. Marilyn Manson himself gives us even more details about the initial meeting with Kurt Sutter in an interview with Loudwire published exactly a year later on December the 19th, 2014. Let's review some of the details about Phoebe's statement. First, the friends Phoebe went to Manson's house with when she was a teenager were not other teenage girls, as most would assume when reading her statement, but it was with Jackson White and his stepfather Kurt Sutter. Second, though we assume from her initial statement that she and her other teenage friends went to Manson's house for a party of some sort, in reality, as she later said in Variety, she went with Jackson White and Kurt Sutter for a meeting, and presumably the meeting had to do with Manson getting a role on Sons of Anarchy through his music and or acting part. Third, we know this meeting took place on December 18th, 2013. Attending this meeting were at least Marilyn Manson, Shooter Jennings, Kurt Sutter, Jackson White, and Phoebe Bridgers. Fourth, delicious pie was served at this meeting. Fifth, the meeting was set up by Shooter Jennings and revolved around Marilyn Manson's musical collaboration for the show with Shooter and Kurt. We know that this musical collaboration never worked out eventually, but Manson's dream did come true by impressing Kurt enough to be offered a key role on the show for the last season, with Kurt saying of Manson, "He was awesome." 6. Phoebe Bridgers was born on August 17th, 1994, therefore on December 18th, 2013, Phoebe was 19 years old, hardly still a teenager, and needlessly emphasised that she was one. Now ask yourself, is this a type of gathering you pictured when you initially read Phoebe's statement from February 4th? I would venture to think not. Why would Phoebe leave out the names of her friends who she accompanied to this meeting and be so cryptic? It seems like she had something to hide, perhaps not wanting them to witness against her testimony, or maybe she is holding them complicit in Manson's alleged words about an R room and using racial slurs. It was shortly before this meeting with Kurt Sutter in October 2013 that Marilyn Manson and his girlfriend, now wife Lindsay Usich, purchased a new house on Troy Street in the Hollywood Hills for nearly $1.1 million. This is the same house that would eventually be swatted by police in February 2021, and that was later sold by Manson and Lindsay for $1.835 million. This is certainly the house where Phoebe Bridgers would have visited Marilyn Manson and his girlfriend Lindsay for that meeting with Kurt Sutter and that delicious pie on December 18th, 2013. It was hardly even lived in, since it had been purchased a little more than 2 months prior to this meeting. In fact, in a video conference with Manson and Sutter almost a year after this initial meeting in August 2014, Manson takes us on a mini tour of his house and says that the room he was in was painted a different colour from the time they initially met. At the time of the meeting in December 2013, Manson was in a serious relationship with his current wife and then girlfriend Lindsay Usich, who he started dating in August 2010 after Evan Rachel Wood, but she never became his exclusive girlfriend until around nearly 2012. In this light, and in light of everything we know so far, let's consider the R-room allegation, or as she said in Variety, his plural jokes and racial slurs. First, if we would look at Phoebe's R-room reference as being something Manson could have said in any sort of a serious or factual literal way, I seriously would have a hard time believing that. This was a brand new home. They were probably hardly unpacked by the time of this meeting. Therefore, it could not have been literal or factual or serious in any way. Also, why would Manson bring up a real R room in a business meeting, especially with people he had just met and was trying to impress? If Kurt Sutter, who Phoebe still follows on Twitter, heard Manson talking about a real R room in his house, there's no way he would have taken such a liking to him that he offered him a role on his show. Second, Phoebe implies herself that Manson said this is a joke and not seriously, although in light of the allegations of Evan Rachel Wood and others, she also implies that this frat boy joke had a level of truth to it, though this implication seems to be in light of current events and not how she saw it at the time. Phoebe apparently considered this joke to be so horrible that she stopped being a fan of Manson, whereas previous to this she claims to have been a big fan. The problem with this is fourfold. A, in Manson's own words, to get either a music or an acting role in Sons of Anarchy was for him a dream come true, and was part of an emotional bond with his dying father. Are we to suppose Manson told our joke in reference to his new house and in front of his girlfriend with 2 men in the room he greatly admired, Shooter and Kurt, and wanted to impress, and 2 teenagers he didn't even know and were probably an insignificant presence? Phoebe was not famous at the time and likely did not take part in the conversation. Personally, I would never put Manson above saying an R joke, but certainly not in these conditions. I think for Manson, an R joke may come along in a 3rd or 4th business meeting, but certainly not the first. B, if Phoebe was truly a big fan of Manson going into the house and emerged from the house no longer a fan, then we can assume Phoebe was never really a big fan, because Manson has said much more offensive things than calling a room an R room, and she would know this if she was a big fan. If she could endure her fandom everything Manson said and did before calling an R room, then this is what crossed the line, then we can assume she doesn't have much of a sense of humour either, at least Manson's well-known dark humour. A scroll through a Tumblr account, however, would show that she does. C. If Phoebe stopped being a big fan of Manson after the R-Room joke, then why did she not talk about it until after Evan Rachel Wood and the other accusers came forward? D. Phoebe says in the Variety interview that Manson was using R jokes and R slurs during this meeting, plural, and that this was him on his best behaviour. However, how does Phoebe know to distinguish his best behaviour from his worst behaviour? She only met him once. These are good points, I think. And E, I don't know whether or not Phoebe was a big fan of Manson before she went over to his house, but we do know on June the 4th, 2013, she tweeted about purchasing a Marilyn Manson dress, so this may indicate some level of fandom. However, I do know that the day that Phoebe went to Manson's house, she did not tweet about him saying some horrible offensive joke about an R-Room to make her own friends and followers aware of how horrible he was, but instead on December 19th she posted on Instagram a picture of his cat, Lily White, drinking from his sink, and she name dropped him twice in doing so, while also including the hashtag. What is even more damning is the fact that a month after the meeting at Manson's house, on January 22nd, 2014, Phoebe tweeted, "Marilyn Manson is my dad," for no apparent reason other than the fact that we know at the time Phoebe was having a very strained relationship with her father. And then on March 19, 2015, she posted on a Tumblr a photo of Manson holding a cute stuffed dragon. I'll also include below an exchange with a musician she knew who attended the Marilyn Manson concert in 2016. This aged terribly. There's Manson with the toy dragon. Going to metal concert is the epitome of why the hell is she with that guy? You at Manson, bro? Oh. In light of all of this, I highly doubt in the context of this business meeting that Marilyn Manson made a joke about an R-Room in his brand new house, let alone that she was so offended that she stopped being a fan of Manson or even liking him, let alone that he even said the R word more than once and used R slurs that evening unless it was referred to in relation to the show Sons of Anarchy, and Phoebe may have misunderstood the context as she was off taking photos of Lily drinking water out of the sink or in ecstasy taking a bite out of some delicious apple pie. Phoebe, being the radicalised feminist that she is, seems to display here a distaste towards frat boy sense of humour, probably because radicalised feminists and frat boys aren't really known to get along. Well, that's true. Next paragraph. However, if we look further into Phoebe's dark sense of humour, we will notice something in particular that is very dark about it. As someone who is so offended and put off by an alleged R joke, which even Evan Rachel Wood has said that she enjoys a good R joke as long as it's funny, you would assume her to be prim and proper lady with more of a highbrow sense of humour, but Phoebe Bridgers is the exact opposite. I mean, this is a woman whose official website address is Phoebe effing Bridgers. She makes a lot of sex jokes, for example, constantly tells people to suck my D, and just a few weeks after accusing Manson, she posted on Twitter, "Can't wait to F all my friends when this is over." However, it seems that her favourite types of jokes revolve around death and murder. Below are just a few examples from her Twitter feed. Do you write your songs all by yourself? I will kill you all by myself. I want to marry a man who is never on time so I can refer to him as my late husband, but also kill him. Sometimes I think I'm a killer. Harry said this was funny. Haha, someone at Spotify thinks murder is wholesome. Comment a lyric and I'll tell you exactly what it means. Can you confirm or deny that the whole thing with Garden Song is that you and someone else killed and buried him in the garden because of it? Makes the soil and water magical and life-giving, because it took me forever to get it, and all my friends were like, it's so obvious. Yeah, I had a crush on someone who lives next to an N, and used to joke about us him and burying him in the garden. Originally, it had this whole thing about making out on top of the unmarked grave, but it was very stupid.
Your industry is rife with stories of what's happened to women with very little accountability.
Yeah, I think it's never enough. I think it's very funny that Marilyn Manson's label decided to drop him right when the story went public, and people have just known about it for so long. I find that very annoying. I think it's a lot of performative activism, basically. I think people should take more responsibility internally. It doesn't matter how many people know about it. You should, look into things like you're the FBI. But when people make people money, it's really hard. I know it's really hard to walk away from that, but I think more people should.
With regard to her further comments on Instagram, where she said the label knew, management knew, the band knew, distancing themselves now, pretending to be shocked and horrified, is effing pathetic. We have questions, to quote Emily D. Baker. How does she know what Manson's label knew, or his management, or his band? How does she know he wasn't dropped by his label and management, out of fear of backlash? And he's only one artist, and obviously they represent many. And as for his band, they never reported to have dropped or distanced themselves from Manson. So we're not really sure what she's talking about. It does seem like she doesn't really know anything about what the label knew, management knew, or the band knew, because she's not really privileged to any of that information. If she is privileged to that information, maybe she should tell us. It's much more probable that Manson's label and management dropped him for fear of any backlash and for business purposes, more than any personal information they had some secret knowledge of. None of the band, label or management have ever expressed that they were shocked or horrified by Manson, so Phoebe's statement is just sounding more and more meaningless and self-serving. Essentially, it seems like she's just jumping on the bandwagon of cleaning up the sexism in the music industry, and that's a commendable cause. I fully support it, but I don't support making up stories about people and trying to ruin their lives, which appears to be something that Phoebe is better known for. It would appear that in October 2020 she posted something on social media about Chris Nelson, who's a music producer, where she directed her followers on Instagram to a thread written by her friend Emily Bannon, which Nelson has claimed was defamatory. Now, Emily Bannon was actually Chris Nelson's girlfriend when Bridgers started having a relationship with her, so there's obviously some water under that bridge. Nelson's suing her for $3.8 million in damages. He claims that Bridgers intentionally used her high-profile public platform on Instagram to publish false and defamatory statements about him in order to destroy his reputation. Sound familiar? Oh, it gets more familiar than that. In a sworn declaration filed on February 14, Bridgers responded to the allegations, saying, "I believe that the statements I made on my Instagram story are true. My statements were made based on my personal knowledge, including statements I personally heard Mr. Nelson make." Nelson subsequently demanded the right to depose Bridgers, saying it was the only way to prove that the musician had defamed him. Earlier this month, Bridgers' lawyers called the request harassment. Of course they did. Sound familiar? Mr. Nelson's amorphous request for discovery based on his attorney's circular statement that it is necessary is nothing more than thinly veiled harassment, her lawyer wrote in March 16th court filing. This just happened a few days ago, by the way. This went before the judge a few days ago. In February, Bridgers sought to end the lawsuit, citing California's anti-SLAPP law in a new court filing. Well, surprise, surprise, there we go again. The motion filed said that Nelson is enough of a public person that he must prove that Bridgers acted with actual malice. Ms. Bridgers has submitted a declaration affirming her subjective belief in the truth of her statements, so Mr. Nelson cannot meet his burden. The proof therefore should grant this special motion to strike, they stated. They all seem to be doing these same things, trying to skirt around things. The court filings. So, let's have a look. Whose filing is this? This is the plaintiff Chris Nelson's verified complaint for defamation per se, defamation per quad, false light, intentional infliction of emotional distress, intentional interference with prospective economic relations, negligent interference with prospective economic relations, and injunctive relief. And it just does look like, trying to silence someone when you ask for an injunction. Okay, plaintiff owns and operates Sound Space, a recording studio located in downtown Los Angeles, which offers both a creative and comfortable environment, blah, blah, blah. Plaintiff strives to promote diversity in music and intentionally seeks to work with people of colour, women, and members of the LGBT community on music projects in order to provide equal opportunities to all musicians, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, or sexual orientation. Plaintiff is also a respected expert musical instrument collector, distributor, reseller of new, used, and vintage musical instruments and recording equipment. Plaintiff first learned about defendant Bridgers through her drummer, Marshall Vaughn. Plaintiff is informed and believes that defendant Bridgers had a prior relationship with Mr. Vaughn and that Mr. Vaughn started dating defendant Bridgers when Bridgers was in her teens. Defendant Bridgers is a social advocate. Among other things, in approximately 2019, she detailed multiple accounts of alleged abuse by Bryan Adams, a singer-songwriter and record producer. Defendant Bridgers was interviewed by the New York Times in connection with her allegations of emotional abuse by Mr. Adams. Following her interview, she released the following statement on her Instagram, for which her handle at the time was Phoebe Bridgers. It's been a weird week and I want to say a couple of things. Thank you from my whole effing heart to my friends, my band, my mum. They all supported and validated me. They told me that what happened was effed up and wrong, and that I was right to feel weird about it. I couldn't have done this without them. Ryan had a network too, friends, bands, people he worked with. None of them held him accountable. They told him by what they said or by what they didn't that what he was doing was okay. They validated him. He couldn't have done this without them. Guys, if your friend is acting effed up, call them out. If they're actually your friend, they'll listen. That's the way this all gets better.
Ryan Adams. He was the subject of a profile in LA Magazine just this past month, and the first bit of media coverage that Adams has received since 2019, when the New York Times did a hit on him that halted his career during the peak of fervor around Me Too allegations. He's kind of been out there for 20 years. His big debut album, Soul as a Solo Artist, was Heartbreaker. He comes from 1990s. Americana and kind of alt country. He had this big successful band in North Carolina called Whiskey Town that was popular in the Raleigh area. The story that came out in 2019 from the New York Times, it's a piece by Joe Coscarelli and Melina Ryzik, and it basically ties together during the peak of the Me Too fervor around allegations and sort of assessing power dynamics in music, entertainment, and politics, an attack on Ryan Adams' reputation, which, it must be said, has always been a very messy reputation to begin with. So the piece by Joe and Milena, they tie together accusations from around the music industry that Adams had a string of romances, flings with young female musicians, most notably the popular rising star, big star at this point, Phoebe Bridgers. He offered recording and collaboration and promises of success for a string of sort of young musicians in their early 20s. And almost in every case, these relationships, these mentorships, these offerings for recording time, they turned sexual very quickly in some cases. And then when things soured with those people, he would harass, gaslight, freeze them out, try to make them feel like they were the ones who caused all the problems in the first place. The second prong of this story is that Ryan had also done this to his very famous wife, Mandy Moore, the pop star from the 90s and early 2000s, who he married in 2009. And Mandy Moore has now alleged that he maliciously smothered her career in its prime. She had publicly been quite graceful with Ryan when their marriage fell apart several years later, around 2015, 2016. This began all of this and sort of was put into the New York Times story as sort of a continued thread. He did this to his wife. He's done this to young girls in the industry. It must be noted that she didn't say anything about all of this until the New York Times came to her with the allegations about younger artists and let her know that he had been unfaithful throughout the marriage. Maybe she had an inkling of suspicion, but she was not aware previously that he had had all these dalliances on the side. And then the third element of this story, which was the most damaging by far, was that Adams had been engaging in a sexual text phone relationship with an underage fan identified only as Ava. And during the final years of his marriage to Moore was when this was all going on. Now, this all began when Ava was 14, 15 years old, and she was misleading Adams throughout the entirety of their relationship about her age, sort of assuring him that he was 18, and then never being able to provide proof.
The sense you get is this lack of self-control from that, of like he was so tempted by that even though, you know, his judgment really kind of said, this is probably, he had some intuition that said this is a bad freaking idea. There was something about the allure of his relationship with her and maybe how illicit it was that kept him continuing down that road.
Yeah, I mean, I think that has to be considered as an element of it. You know, I don't want to play what's the armchair guy psychiatrist about anybody that I don't know, but there's an element of like just living right on the edge with something you know you're not supposed to do for a musician who is in a bad spot in his marriage, clearly has dealt with addiction and all sorts of different problems. And I think he just has a self-destructive streak, which plays into that. I do want to just cap off before we dive into those details that after the New York Times piece laid out all of these three things, kind of weaving them all together, the FBI reportedly launched an investigation into Adams, going through all of the text message, all of the emails, all the different correspondences. And after the FBI investigation was reported on in the fall of 2019, they opened it and then they swiftly closed it within a year. And that element of it was what led to him losing sponsorships for all of his gear, lost his record distribution deals with Blue Note, a subsidiary of Capitol, lost all of his tour dates, and pretty much all of his friends and personal connections. So kind of all of it goes out the window pretty much when the FBI thing kind of sealed the deal of like, all right, this guy's really, really toxic. So I think maybe we start there with the fact that the story sort of ties together misconduct and gaslighting behavior, but clearly the most damaging thing is dealing with an underage person online, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's really interesting about Ryan Adams was somebody who really was into the fan engagement side of things, interacting with his fans online, developing relationships with them. Every person who's sort of in the spotlight or who is in the sort of creative realm has some amount, it makes some decision about the level of engagement that they want to have and how personal they want it to be with their fans, either communicating just through press people or sometimes reaching out to some people, really, So every artist makes these decisions, and Adams had long been somebody who decided to go for a high degree of engagement. Clearly that totally burned him. And I sort of see this as an indictment of groupieism. The sense that I got from these Times reporters is that there's this long tradition of having groupies in this industry, and it's sometimes difficult to figure out the boundary between that.
I'm not sure I agree, but I want to kick it to Katie here, and then we can kind of unpack that claim about groupieism. Katie, you were kind of like getting familiar with this entire story. What was your takeaway, particularly with the angle about where the underage fan and the FBI investigation came into it?
Well, first of all, I'm curious about why the FBI is getting involved in this. This does not seem like the type of thing that our national security apparatus should really be investigating. And from what I can tell from the reporting, what the FBI found was basically nothing. And that the girl later said that she had told Ryan Adams continually that she was 18. I'm not sure where she is or what the age of consent is where she was. Is it a bad idea for him to?
Yeah, and so like that's kind of one of the things is like the age of consent laws and engaging in illicit communications with minors are completely two different things, because age of consent applies to physical contact.
And this had no physical component to it. This was all cross-state borders, online digital contact.
Yeah, which you should not and cannot do. It is in fact illegal, but there has to be that thread of knowing exactly what you are doing.
Right.
And I would challenge the whether or not the FBI should be doing this. They have an entire wing of the FBI that's dedicated to protecting minors
like
from
child porn
from predators. And there was an exchange of illicit photos and all sorts of stuff throughout the chain of this communication, but it was done under the guise of this person being 18, even if it seemed in the communications that he was a little doubtful that that was true.
Right. So in my thinking, she admitted that she had misled him about her age. Should he be held responsible for being duped for the rest of his life?
But do you actually think he was duped, and does it matter? Like, it's the sense that I get through reading these text exchange. I mean, at one point he asked her to produce an ID to prove that she's 18, but to do it in the sexiest way possible, LOL. Because naturally everybody always ends everything, flirty and texty with like LOL. But like, do you actually... when reading the exchanges, I got the sense that he was technically, his lawyer's defense is fine. He never knew, she never communicated that she was under 18. But do you actually think he was hoodwinked or duped, or do you think he kind of like understood what was going on here?
Part of the thing here, and I think Katie's like, when you say that like we shouldn't speculate, I think that's actually kind of the entire point.
Yeah.
And that's part of the thing about the entirety of this story, which I find to be unsavory. There's a lot of speculation throughout the New York Times piece that came out in 2019.
The power dynamic is interesting, and it's obviously not a new one, but I think that oftentimes we forget that there's an attraction to power. I'm sort of generalizing here, but it's not as though these people didn't know, specifically Phoebe Bridgers, when he was already famous, and Mandy Moore as well, when he entered into these relationships with them. In some ways, it's hard for me not to see these exchanges as somewhat transactional, and they were getting something out of it as well. And I do think women are, have just as much autonomy as anybody else, just as much autonomy as men, and should be able to make their own decisions and to go into these relationships with open eyes and sort of, take responsibility for their own actions.
Yeah, I want to put a pin in that point, because I think that's really important for the next plank of the story, which is the Mandy Moore part of the story. To kind of close out the loop a little bit on the FBI part of it, an FBI investigation, reports of that being opened is incredibly damaging. There was a moment after the New York Times story dropped where there was an eerie quiet, where everybody was kind of waiting, like, are you going to drop your deal with him first? Because we're thinking about it. And then when you get a report that the FBI is now going to look into interactions with an underage person, that's when things hit the fan. But you never really hear about until 2021, when the LA Magazine did their profile on him 2 weeks ago, that the investigation was closed and the two parties reconciled. The person in question, Ava, communicated to Adam's lawyer, I, quote, was not truthful about the age in my texts and communications with Ryan and repeatedly told him I was 18. Contrary to the Times article, Ryan and I both freely participated equally in texts of a sexual nature with one another. Ryan is a good human being, and my sole wish is that both of us have learned from this experience. You know, and then Adam's response to that was, I ran away from home and was estranged when I was your age, and I did a lot of things that I shouldn't have done as well.
This is my entire issue with so much of how people metabolize and digest the issues in our criminal justice system and issues with Me Too related offenses. They pay so much attention to this person was, you know, there was this allegation levied at this person was charged with a crime, but they do not pay very much attention to, okay, when this was actually investigated further, what did the FBI find? What exactly happened?
Nothing.
What evidence was there
anything
to substantiate this? And so I mean, this is an endemic problem overall. People just reading the headlines and not actually seeking to understand at a deeper level what went down. But I have a huge issue with people sort of throwing these allegations around and then not actually paying attention to the follow-up of, okay, well, what did the FBI find? Not that much. Or certainly not enough to prove that he'd acted, maybe he acted in an untoward way, but certainly not in a criminal one.
But it doesn't matter because once the allegation is leveled, then the punishment starts. And there are very few cases of these cases that have been re-reported where the person is found to be not culpable, where it's sort of like, okay, you're forgiven, we're sorry, never mind, come back into polite society. It's just the allegation itself is enough to damn people for life.
Yeah, I mean, that's a career ender.
We don't really do exonerations in the court of public opinion, and I think that's a huge problem.
Q Magazine, Rolling Stone Magazine, Uncut Magazine. Oh, well, these guys haven't been canceled. Let's fucking capitalize on them. And you cancel people. You cancel them. You remove them from your list, just like Spotify, like Apple Music. They're like, they're mentally ill, but these people are mentally ill before this time. You won't fucking face it. You can't deal with it. You suck. You fucking strip us of our dignity. People who don't know how to think, who don't know, you don't go, here's a hand. Let's lift you up. You just go, let's just damn these people to hell. Let's just make these people want to fucking kill themselves. You have blood on your hands. You fucking people are horrible. You have blood on your hands. You literally do.
So even though he was found innocent of the allegations, or the worst of the allegations made against him, and then he apologised to anyone else he may have mistreated along the way, and let's face it, he obviously did have an issue with drug and alcohol abuse, he seems to be the one suffering from emotional abuse. And on top of that, he did apologise publicly. So how did the women feel whom he apologised to when they did actually get the apology?
Over the weekend, your ex-husband made kind of a public apology during this world of Me Too. He said, it was in the Daily Mail, I guess, he said he was sorry and he was sober. Do you believe that he's changed?
You know, it's challenging because I feel like in many ways I've said all I want to say about him in that situation. But I find it curious that someone would make a public apology but not do it privately. I am speaking for myself, but I have not heard from him, and I'm not looking for an apology necessarily, but I do find it curious that someone would sort of do an interview about it without actually making amends privately.
Yeah.
You see how this works. The lawyers will tell you, don't have any contact with the people accusing you of these things. That's just standard practice. But he did apologise. And not only did he apologise, he didn't make any excuses and say, well, I didn't do those things. He didn't deny anything. He simply apologised. Accepted responsibility and says that he will remain accountable for his harmful behaviour moving forward. Is this not the best possible outcome? Clearly not if you're an ex-wife with an axe to grind. Anyway, back to the lawsuit. Over the course of plaintiff and defendant Bridges' friendship, Bridges made several complaints to plaintiff concerning things that her drummer Mr. Ford did, including the fact that while he was in his 30s, he dated Zoe Donahue, who was 18 years old at the time, and also encouraged Ruby Henley, 19 years old at the time, to move in with him. Although defendant Bridges expressed concern to plaintiff about Mr. Vor's history with dating and or pursuing teenage girls, defendant Bridges never made any public comments about Mr. Vor. Plaintiff and defendant Bridges, who is a musician, never worked together in any capacity. Well, that's surprising. Rather, in or around 2018, plaintiff and his girlfriend at the time, Emily Bannon, began having consensual sexual encounters with defendant Bridges. Whoa. Heavy. On or around September 2nd, 2019, plaintiff, defendant Bridges and Bannon celebrated what defendant Bridges called their F-iversary. Oh, so this went on for some time. Plaintiff is informed and believes that defendant Bridges had prior sexual relationship with Bannon. Shortly after plaintiff's relationship with Bannon began, it was revealed that defendant Bridges, Bannon and Bridges' boyfriend at the time, Connor Burst, were having a relationship. Based upon information and belief, this relationship occurred while Bannon was in a relationship with defendant Bridges' drummer, Harrison Whitford, who was aware of the relationship between Bannon and defendant Bridges. Plaintiff is informed and believes that defendant Bridges and Bannon continued their relationship even after plaintiff Bannon's relationship ended in or around the fall of 2019. In December 2019, defendant Bridges posted the following photograph on her Instagram. Defendant Bridges also brought Bannon as her date to the 2019 GQ Men of the Year party and posted a photograph with her and Bannon with the text, "I am in love with you." In approximately March 2020, Bannon wrote plaintiff an email stating she, Phoebe, and I still love each other endlessly, as we did before I knew you, and as we will into the foreseeable future. In around October 2020, defendant Bridges published false and misleading statements about plaintiff on her public Instagram account at Fake News, stating, "I witness and can personally verify much of the abuse, grooming, stealing, violence perpetrated by Chris Nelson, owner of studio called Soundspace." Defendant Bridges intentionally directed the public to Bannon's Instagram account by publishing a post stating, "For anyone who knows plaintiff, is considering working with him or wants to know more, there is an articulate and mind-blowing account of Emily Bannon's page as a highlight. Trigger warning for basically everything triggering." The false and misleading statements about plaintiff on the Instagram included plaintiff beat a young Latinx man to death after provoking him with a racial slur. Plaintiff did that to a young man. Oh, goodness gracious, these are obviously silly. Bludgeoned at least one other man with a baseball bat and left him to bleed out in an alleyway. If any of this were true, he'd have been charged with murder. Plaintiff committed racially motivated hate crimes, including intentionally rear-end drivers of colour and then challenging them to call the police, knowing that his white privilege would protect him from any consequences whatsoever, but expose his victims to a prohibitive level of risk of deportation, incarceration, or brutality by forcing them to interact with cops. Plaintiff defrauded a neighbour out of an estimated $100,000 to $130,000. Plaintiff forging the neighbour's signature when stealing $50,000 from the neighbour. Plaintiff robbed a storage unit of an estimated tens of thousands of dollars of belongings. Plaintiff sells stolen gear and manufactures fake rare guitars to defraud collectors and museums, and uses all manner of devious engineering to trick unwitting buyers into paying a premium for modified junk. And if any of that were the case, people would be suing him out west and crooked. Plaintiff was hacking defendant Bannon and other women's email accounts. Defendant Bridgers also shared the defamatory and misleading statements from Bannon's Instagram account on her own Instagram, which at the time the defamatory content and statements were published had a following of approximately 500,000 accounts. The defamatory posts were also shared by Bridges' guitarist Harrison Whitford, who is also Bannon's ex-boyfriend. Plaintiff is informed and believes that defendant Bridges maliciously and intentionally posted the false and defamatory statements about plaintiff as part of a vendetta to destroy plaintiff's reputation that was inflamed by the defendant Bridges and Bannon's sexual relationship. As a result of defendant Bridges' conduct, plaintiff suffered damages in the amount to be proven at trial, but no less than $3.8 million. Okay, this is really just restating what we have just read through. Defendant Bridges' statement that she witnessed plaintiff committing grooming is false, and defendant Bridges knew it was false at the time she posted it. This is where we get into the defamation area. The malice area. Rather, defendant Bridges had a consensual relationship with plaintiff and Bannon that was entirely encouraged by both defendant Bridges and Bannon. On defendant Bridges' birthday in 2019, plaintiff gifted her a rare guitar worth thousands of dollars and it became one of her most prized possessions. A mere weeks before defendant Bridges posted the defamatory statements, she sent plaintiff the following text. Something about Google. It's a totally incredible cluster F. Then cruise around because there's no specific distinct, it's sort of scattered, but ultimately that's the epicenter. Bless you. Happy belated birthday, Phoebe. Belated, thank you to that, sir. Still, no one will ever beat your present last year, my most prized possession. Defendant Bridges further witnessed plaintiff lend his camera to shoot her recent album cover, writing, "Thank you so much for letting us, Olaf, Emily and Phoebe, use your camera." Defendant Bridges also witnessed plaintiff gift Marshall Ball and Harrison Whitford several guitars, percussion and a synth toy. When defendant Bridges had plaintiff visit her in the studio. Afterwards, defendant Bridges texted plaintiff, "Oh my God, Chris, you were too generous." Defendant Bridges intentionally made the defamatory statements with knowledge of their falsity and or had serious doubts about the truth of the statements. After she posted her statements on Instagram, defendant Bridges admitted to plaintiff that she knew the statements were false and or had serious doubts about the truth of the statements. Approximately 24 hours after posting, Bridges told him that at Moon Juice in Silver Lake, California, that she felt the comments were grey and she had not seen Bannon in months and she thought Bannon was in rehab for whippets. Bannon Bridges stated she wanted to get lunch with plaintiff and ended the conversation with a hug. We're still going over the same things. In or around January 21, a musician advised plaintiff that she could no longer put this song out. "I'm sorry you're going through all of the bullshit with Bridges and your ex. I wish none of this was happening to you, and I'm sorry that our good work can't come out right now." Okay, so these are the damages. There are more texts in this. There was apparently hundreds of texts released, so let's have a look for the texts. Oh, they're not attached. Dang. So there you go, folks. It's official. Phoebe Bridgers is not a Manson accuser. She simply overheard something that could well be connected to Sons of Anarchy. But she is a serial accuser, and she did hook up with Chris Nelson's ex-wife, who totally unusually has an axe to grind with her ex-husband.